So far we have seen various atomic models in which we mainly discussed Bohr atomic model. We got various terms related to Bohr model. Now let us see few more problems based on Bohr model. Let us see. There are 3 energy levels 1, 2 and 3 given. During transition from 2 to 1, the emitted photon has wavelength lambda 1, and during transition from 3 to 1, the wavelength of emitted photon is lambda 2. Then you need to find the wavelength of emitted photon when transition is from 3 to 2. So there are 3 different energy levels 1, 2 and 3. The wavelength of emitted photon during transition from 2 to 1 is lambda 1, during 3 to 1 it is lambda 2. Now you need to find the wavelength of emitted photon when transition is from 3 to 2. Okay. Now let us see the energy gap between 3 to 2, delta E32 is equal to energy gap delta E31 minus delta E21. This particular energy gap 3 to 2 is equal to the energy gap 3 to 1 minus the energy gap 2 to 1 is the remaining energy gap 3 to 2. Now from Bohr's second postulate, the energy gap delta is equal to h nu or is equal to hc by lambda. So here from we can write hc by lambda is equal to hc by 3 to 2, we have wavelength lambda 2 minus hc by lambda 1 or 1 upon lambda is equal to 1 by lambda 2 minus 1 by lambda 1, that is lambda 1 minus lambda 2 by lambda 1 lambda 2, or lambda is equal to lambda 1 lambda 2 by lambda 1 minus lambda 2. This is the wavelength of the emitted photon. Is it clear? Now the next question. If potential energy in ground state is taken to be 0, then what will be the total energy in first excited state? The question is, if potential energy in ground state of hydrogen atom is taken to be 0, then what will be the total energy in first excited state of hydrogen atom? Is it clear? Now let us see how to solve this particular question. You know that potential energy depends upon choice of frame of reference. Then actual case, the potential energy in n equal to 1 and 2 and kinetic energy at 1 and 2, let me write the values first. At n is equal to 1, actual potential energy U1 is equal to minus 27.2 electron volt and kinetic energy K1 is 13.6 electron volt, such that total energy is minus 13.6 electron volt. And at n is equal to 2, that is first excited state, potential energy U2 is equal to minus 6.8 electron volt, kinetic energy K2 is equal to 3.4 electron volt, and total energy E2 is equal to minus 3.4 electron volt. These are the actual values of potential energy, kinetic energy and total energy at n equal to 1 and 2. Now, it is said that potential energy's ground state is taken to be 0. Potential energy in ground state is taken to be 0, then what will be the total energy in first excited state that we need to find? Suppose if I lift a body from ground, potential energy of every point, if I lift the body vertically upward from ground, increase in potential energy of each point are equal as displacement of each point is equal. Similarly, if I increase potential energy of ground state, the potential energy of first excited state, second excited state, everyone will be increasing, but that is not going to change the kinetic energy. So, if potential energy is in ground state is made 0, how it is made 0? We can make it 0 by adding 27.2 electron volt of energy, then it will become 0. If we add the potential energy here, we need to add the same energy at other state. So, I add same potential energy 27.2 electron volt here. So, the potential energy is now 27.2 minus 6.8, that is equal to 20.4 electron volt. This is the new potential energy U2 dash. So, new total energy E2 dash will be equal to new potential energy plus new kinetic energy, that is 20.4 electron volt plus 3.4 electron volt, that is 23.8 electron volt. That is the new total energy of the atom in first excited state. So, now the energy becomes 23.8 electron volt. So far, we have discussed about Bohr model, in which the centripetal force is provided by Coulomb attraction between nucleus and orbiting electron. But now we make a little change. We assume some hypothetical atoms where the force is provided by some other type of force and it is not Coulomb force. The force could be some other type of force, as it will be given in the question. Such atoms will be calling them as hypothetical atoms. So, we get hypothetical Bohr atoms, where the force between nucleus and orbiting particle is not Coulomb force, it is some other kind of force. So, what changes will be there? In first postulate, the centripetal force will be provided by the other kind of force which will be there given in the question, and rest of the calculation is same as before. So, what changes? The first postulate becomes minus mv square by r is equal to the centripetal force, whatever force is given in the question. The second postulate, E2 minus E1 is equal to h nu remains same. The third postulate, mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi, that remains same. Only the first postulate changes, the force changes, and accordingly rest of the calculation, and the calculation, the method is same as before. Let us see how to use it. The question is given, the potential energy between electron and nucleus is given by U is equal to K ln R, where K is a constant and R is orbital radius. Then find the expression of R in terms of principal quantum number n. So, potential energy between orbiting particle, that is electron and nucleus, is given by K log R. where r is orbital radius, you need to find expression for orbital radius in terms of principal quantum number. So, as u is equal to k log r, we know f is equal to minus du by dr. This is equal to minus k ddr of ln r, that is equal to minus k by r. So, from Bohr's first postulate, we can write mv square by r is equal to k by r, or v is equal to under root k by m. This is the expression for speed. Now, orbital radius, from third postulate, we know mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi. If I put the value of v here, m under root k by mr is equal to nh upon 2 pi, or r is equal to nh upon 2 pi under root mk. So, this is now the expression for orbital radius, r is equal to nh upon 2 pi under root mk. Now, r is proportional to principal quantum number n. Okay. Let us see another problem. The potential energy between orbiting particle and nucleus is given by u is equal to half m omega square r square, where mass is m, omega is angular speed, r is radius of orbit. Then find the expression of total energy in terms of principal quantum number. So, potential energy is half m omega square r square, where the symbols has their usual meaning, and you have to find the expression of total energy in terms of principal quantum number. So, same as before, this is u, so centripetal force is minus dr, that is minus half m omega square du by dr of r square, that is equal to minus m omega square r. This is the centripetal force. From Bohr's first postulate, mv square by r is equal to m omega square r, or here from we have v is equal to r omega. If v is equal to r omega, then we have kinetic energy, k is equal to half mv square, that is equal to half m omega square r square, that is kinetic energy. Now, let us get from Bohr's third postulate, mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi, m v is r omega, so m omega r square is equal to nh upon 2 pi, or r is equal to under root nh upon 2 pi m omega. This is the expression for r, and here from using this we can have total energy is equal to potential plus kinetic. Potential is half m omega square r square, kinetic also half m omega square r square. So, it is a total of m omega square r square. R we have already found in terms of principal quantum number, m omega square into nh upon 2 pi m omega. So, 1 m omega is cancelled, and expression of total energy E is equal to omega n h upon 2 pi. So, now total energy is proportional to principal quantum number. This is the expression of total energy in terms of principal quantum number. So, this is how you need to use the hypothetical atoms where potential energy or force itself would be given in a different form, and you need to use Bohr's first and third postulate to get the other physical quantities. If frequency or wavelength photon is asked, then you could use the second postulate also. So this is a hypothetical Bohr model. Now, so far whatever we have done, there was only one orbiting particle. So that is the limitation of Bohr model. Bohr model has certain limitation. One among them is it is applicable for single orbiting particle. If in an atom there are two or more electrons, Bohr model cannot be applied directly. We need to modify the model again. That we will be getting later on, how to modify that model. But presently this is the limitation, that Bohr model is applicable for single electron atom or ion. That is, it is applicable for hydrogen, it is applicable for deuterium, it is applicable for sodium plus 10, etc. Whatever be the atom or ion, it should contain only one electron. So that is the limitation of Bohr model. Now next we will be getting atomic collision. In atomic collision, first we will be getting atomic recoil. Atomic recoil. What is recoil? That you already know. When we fire bullet from a gun, bullet experiences a back thrust. That back thrust is called recoil. And this happens because of conservation of linear momentum. The same thing happens when an atom de-excites, it emits a photon, and we have previously seen that photon has momentum. So the emitted photon carries some momentum, and from conservation of momentum, if atom was initially at rest, it will gain equal and opposite momentum, and it will move back, that is the recoil. Suppose we have an atom of mass m, where electron makes some transition from higher to lower orbit, emitting a photon of wavelength lambda. Initially the system was at rest, that is, atom was not moving, but when the photon is emitted, the atom experiences a back thrust, because of which it gets a speed known as recoil speed, that is the recoil speed. Now from conservation of linear momentum, final momentum is equal to initial momentum. Final momentum, the momentum of photon, as we have already seen, what is the momentum? P is equal to h by lambda. So momentum of photon is h by lambda, or E by c also, and momentum of the atom is minus of mv, that is final momentum, is equal to 0, that is initial momentum. Why it is minus? The photon is emitted in positive direction, atom recoils in negative direction, that is why momentum of atom is negative. So here from we can write mv is equal to h by lambda, or we can also write E by c, where E is the energy of photon. So it is either h by lambda or E by c. So recoil speed V is equal to h by m lambda or E by cm. This is the recoil speed of atom. Let us see how to use it. The question is, a stationary hydrogen atom de-excites by emitting a blue photon. A stationary excited hydrogen atom de-excites by emitting a blue photon. Then find the recoil speed of the atom. A stationary hydrogen atom de-excites by emitting a blue photon, and we need to find the recoil speed of the atom. So what happens? An excited hydrogen atom is emitting blue photon. Blue photon is emitted when transition is from 4 to 2, that is H beta line. So H beta photon is emitted, the atom experiences a back thrust, because of which it gets a recoil speed. So V is equal to H by m lambda. H is 6.63 into 10 to the power minus 34 joule second. Mass of hydrogen atom is 1.67 into 10 to the power minus 27. Wavelength of blue photon we have already calculated. It is 4864 angstrom, that is into 10 to the power minus 10. So here from I can write 6.63, it is minus 34 minus 27. If I take the decimal here, so it is minus 7. So it can be written as by 1.67 into 4.864 meter per second, which is about 0.9 meter per second. That is the recoil speed of the atom. Okay. Now next we have atomic collision, there in the form of question itself. A neutron is bombarded towards a hydrogen atom in ground state, initially at rest. Find minimum kinetic energy of the bombarded neutron for hydrogen atom to get excited. So a neutron is bombarded on a hydrogen atom in ground state. Find minimum kinetic energy of bombarded neutron for atom to get excited. So initially the neutron has speed u. The speed of hydrogen atom is 0, it is initially at rest. After collision, let neutron moves with velocity v1 and the excited hydrogen atom moves with velocity v2. So this is the situation before collision, this is the situation after collision. We can assume that mass of neutron and mass of hydrogen atom to be equal. So first, from conservation of linear momentum, what we can write? mu plus 0 is equal to mv1 plus mv2, or v1 plus v2 is equal to u. This is the first equation from conservation of linear momentum. Now next, from conservation of total energy. What is the total energy? Initial energy is half mu square is equal to final energy is half mv1 square plus half mv2 square plus delta E, where delta E is the excitation energy. That is H become H star. It is hydrogen atom in ground state and this is excited hydrogen atom. Here from we can write u square is equal to v1 square plus v2 square plus 2 delta E by m. This is the second equation. Now using the first equation and second equation, we put the value of suppose v2, then we can write u square is equal to v1 square. v2 is u minus v1 square plus 2 delta E by m, or u square is equal to v1 square plus u square plus v1 square minus 2u v1 plus 2 delta E by m. So here from I can write this u square is cancelled and we write 2v1 square minus 2uv1 plus 2 delta E by m is equal to 0. 2 is also cancelled. Here we could see it is a quadratic equation of v1. Speed of the particle cannot be imaginary. So discriminator of the quadratic equation has to be positive, as we can say speed cannot be imaginary. So discriminator of the equation has to be greater than equal to 0. So discriminator of the equation is b square minus 4ac, that is u square minus 4, a is 1 into c is delta E by m greater than equal to 0, or u square greater than equal to 4 delta E by m, or half mu square greater than equal to 2 delta E. Half mu square is nothing but kinetic energy of bombarded particle, k greater than equal to 2 delta E, or k minimum is equal to twice of the excitation energy. And what is the minimum excitation energy? Minimum excitation energy is to take electron from ground state to first excited state, that is first excitation energy, and that is 10.2 electron volt. So K minimum is 2 into 10.2 electron volt, that is equal to 20.4 electron volt. This is the minimum kinetic energy of the bombarded particle by which it can excite the atom. Is it clear? So this is about atomic collision. Now next we get atomic excitation. How we can excite an atom. There are three possible ways of atomic excitation. Now we have atomic excitation. There are three possible ways. Number one, by incidence of photons. So when photons are incident, if the energy of photon are sufficient, sufficient means is equal to the energy gap, then atom can get excited by absorbing those energies. So one, by bombardment of photons. The energies of those photons has to be 10.2 Z square electron volt, that is the first excitation energy. 12.1 Z square electron volt, that is second excitation energy. 12.75 Z square electron volt, third excitation energy, etc. These are the energies. Up to 13.6 Z square electron volt, that is the ionization energy, and above. All energies above 13.6 Z square electron volt, because only up to this much energy, ionized state, the atom is in bound state. After that there are free states. So at free states all energy levels are possible. So these are the excitation energies by absorbing photons. Second one, by bombardment of uncharged particles. Uncharged particles. As we have seen in this particular situation, the kinetic energy of bombarded particle has to be greater than equal to 2 delta E. that is any value above 2 delta E. 2 delta E is the minimum energy needed. So, for uncharged particle this much amount of energy is needed. The temperature corresponding to this energy is quite high. How much high? Let us see. Kinetic energy from gaseous state we know it is 3 by 2 kT, where K is Boltzmann constant. That is equal to, for minimum we can have it to be equal to 2 delta E, or here from we can have T is equal to 4 delta E by 3K. This is the order of temperature, and the temperature is of the order of 10 to the power 6, 10 to the power 7 Kelvin. So, temperature is very high. So, atomic excitation by uncharged particles is not possible at ordinary temperature, it requires very high temperature. So, on earth it is not possible, it might be possible inside sun where temperature is very high. And this is why, as we know that the collision among gas molecules is considered to be perfectly elastic. They do not excite, because in collision of molecules the energies are less. The energy is not very high as temperature is not very high. So, in collision energy is not transferred, and that is why in gaseous state kinetic energy of colliding particles is less and collision is perfectly elastic. Inelastic collision is possible at very high temperature only. And the third one is by collision by charged particles. Charged particles, suppose we bombard electrons on atoms, electrons having sufficient energy, the kinetic energy of electron has to be greater than equal to 10.2 electron volt. That much energy is sufficient for exciting atoms by charged particles. And how electron could get this much kinetic energy? We know kinetic energy is equal to Q into V. So, charge of electron is E. So, for atomic excitation with charged particle, the voltage needed V is greater than equal to, you can say, 10.2 volt. With this potential difference we can accelerate the charged particle and give sufficient energy. As you could see, from any light source with small voltage we can switch on the light, that is photons are emitted during de-excitation of atoms. How atoms got excited? We bombarded charged particles such as electrons on them, and for it potential difference required is very less, and it is the easiest way of exciting an atom. Now, one will be getting X-rays, there will find that atom can get excited by bombardment of charged particles. So, that will be getting in X-rays. Now, let me tell you the reason of Bohr hypothesis. Bohr model is not said Bohr theory, it is Bohr hypothesis, as Bohr could not explain his assumptions. But later de Broglie explained the Bohr hypothesis. So, we find de Broglie's explanation of Bohr hypothesis. What de Broglie said? We have seen that Bohr said that there are certain permitted orbits where electrons do not radiate energy. Now, de Broglie said that in Bohr orbits or in stationary orbits, electron waves form stationary waves. That is, electron form stationary waves in Bohr orbits. Their nodes and antinodes are formed, and you already know that in stationary wave energy is not transferred, it is confined between node and antinode. In Bohr orbits also, electron form stationary waves, and that is why energy is not transmitted, their nodes and antinodes are formed. In circular loops, the necessary condition for formation of stationary wave is different from that in straight wire. In circular loops, the necessary condition for stationary waves, if r is the radius of the loop and lambda is the wavelength, then for stationary waves in circular loop, the circumference 2 pi r has to be integral multiple of wavelength. 2 pi r is equal to n lambda. That is, there will be always integral multiple of wavelength in one loop, then only stationary waves could be formed, and these are the points of nodes. These are nodes, so nodes and antinodes are formed. Now according to de Broglie, we know lambda is equal to h by p, or Rp is equal to nh upon 2 pi. P is nothing but linear momentum mv, or we can have mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi. This is what is Bohr's quantization rule, and that is obtained from de Broglie's explanation that electrons behave as waves in orbit, they don't behave as particles. So this is de Broglie's explanation. Now next we have X-rays. What are X-rays? And why the name X-ray? X-rays are obtained, they are electromagnetic waves of high energy. They are of energy of the order of kilo electron volt. Their wavelength ranges from 0.1 angstrom to 100 angstrom. That is the range of their wavelength. Their wavelength is ranging from 0.1 angstrom to 100 angstrom. From 0.1 angstrom to 10 angstrom, the X-ray is called hard X-ray, and 10 angstrom to 100 angstrom, it is called soft X-ray. Hard X-ray is used in engineering science to detect fracture or cracks in machines or in beams or in bridges, whereas soft X-ray is used in medical science to detect cracks in bones. So X-ray are electromagnetic waves of high energy of the order of kilo electron volt, wavelength ranging between 0.1 angstrom to 100 angstrom. So they are nothing but electromagnetic waves of high energy. Now we need to know how X-rays are produced. Previously in hydrogen spectrum we have seen that ultraviolet rays, visible light, infrareds are produced by hydrogen gas, atomic hydrogen gas. Now we need to know how X-ray is being produced. X-ray is being produced in Coolidge tube. It is just a reverse phenomena of photoelectric effect. In photoelectric effect, we have seen that when photons are incident on a surface, electrons are emitted. In X-ray, we will find that electrons are incident and photons are emitted. One major difference is that in photoelectric effect, the energy requirement is less, whereas in X-ray, the energy requirement is much higher. Now let us see how X-ray is being produced. We have an evacuated quartz tube. Here we have a target made up of heavy metal. Which is extended arm. Here we have a plate from which electrons can be emitted. Here we have a filament which can be heated up. Some current IF, filament current, is flown through the filament to heat it up. This heated filament heats up the plate. The heated plate releases electron due to thermionic emission, thermoionic or thermionic emission. These electrons are accelerated towards the target with a high potential difference. High potential difference, it is called accelerating voltage VA. It is of the order of kilovolt. These accelerated electrons gain kinetic energy due to the field between plate and target. These electrons strike the target, lose their kinetic energy, and this lost kinetic energy is emitted in the form of photons. About 1% of the lost kinetic energy is emitted in the form of X-ray. 99% is converted to heat. So to prevent the melting of target, the fins are made, or cold water is flown through the tube. To take away the heat. As I said, 99% is converted to heat, only about 1% of energy is converted to X-rays, and as due to the flow of electrons between plate and target, there is a current called plate current IP. It is of the order of milliampere. This is how X-ray is generated in Coolidge tube. What is being done? Let us see. Filament is heated by filament current. Because of this filament current, electrons are emitted by the plate by thermionic emission. These electrons are bombarded, accelerated towards the target. The accelerating voltage is of the order of kilovolt. This bombarded electron loses their kinetic energy during collision with the atoms of the target. Due to the loss of kinetic energy of these electrons, X-ray is produced. 1% of their kinetic energy is converted in X-ray, 99% in heat. To prevent the melting of target, cold water is flown through the target to take away the heat produced. Due to flow of electrons between plate and target, there is a current from target to plate, that is called plate current, and it is generally kept of the order of milliampere. This is how X-ray is produced. Now, two types of X-rays are produced in the Coolidge tube. One is called continuous X-ray, another is called characteristic X-ray. Now, how continuous X-ray is produced and characteristic X-ray produced? The bombarded electron hits the target, keeps on losing their kinetic energy. By losing their kinetic energy, they keeps on emitting photons continuously. That phenomena is called breaking radiation, when electrons break their kinetic energy into several parts. Due to that breaking radiation, continuous X-ray is produced. That breaking radiation is also called Bremsstrahlung. Bremsstrahlung or breaking radiation. So, continuous X-ray is produced due to Bremsstrahlung, and characteristic X-ray is produced when there is atomic transition in target atoms. So, continuous X-ray is produced by atomic transition. Now, we need to know how continuous X-ray is produced and how characteristic X-ray is produced. So, first, continuous X-ray. We have target element. Let me draw one such atom of target element. We know the name of the orbits. We have given their name as K, L, M, etc. In K shell there are 2 electrons. In L there are 8 electrons. In M there are 18 electrons. So, this is how electrons are distributed. Now, bombarded electron comes. Suppose this is the electron, bombarded electron, which is coming from outside. Its kinetic energy is Ki. It passes through the electric field of the target atom, emerges out with kinetic energy Kf. So, bombarded electron enters the electric field of target atom, enters with kinetic energy Ki and emits or exits out with kinetic energy Kf. So, it loses some part of kinetic energy. That lost kinetic energy is emitted in the form of photon of energy h nu. So, from conservation of energy, energy of the emitted photon h nu is equal to Ki minus Kf. This is equal to hc upon lambda, or lambda is equal to Ki minus Kf upon hc. Sorry, lambda is equal to hc upon Ki minus Kf. This is the wavelength of emitted photon when electron passes through one atom. As it keeps on passing through different atoms of target, it keeps on losing its kinetic energy. That is, its kinetic energy is broken into several parts. Due to each lost part of kinetic energy, the electron emits photon continuously. That is why it is called continuous X-ray. It is the radiation emitted due to breaking up of electrons. That is why it is called breaking radiation, and the phenomena is called Bremsstrahlung. These are the wavelength of emitted photon. Now, if the bombarded electron loses its entire kinetic energy in the very first collision, then what happens? Before striking the target, kinetic energy of incident photon K is equal to E into Va. This is the initial kinetic energy. And if the electron loses entire kinetic energy in the very first collision, then Kf will become 0. So, lost energy will be maximum. If lost energy is maximum, wavelength will be minimum. That minimum wavelength is called threshold wavelength. That is, what is threshold wavelength? When bombarded electron loses its entire kinetic energy in the very first collision, then most energetic photon is emitted. Wavelength corresponding to the most energetic photon is called threshold wavelength. So threshold wavelength is equal to Hc by EVA. If I put the value of Hc by E, then I can write it to be 12,400 by VA volt angstrom. This is the threshold wavelength when electron loses its entire kinetic energy in the very first collision. Otherwise, these will be the wavelength. As electron continuously loses its energy, it keeps on emitting photons continuously, and we obtain continuous X-ray. Now let us see a question. A Coolidge tube is operating at an accelerating voltage of 20 kilovolt. Then find the threshold wavelength for that Coolidge tube. So if accelerating voltage is 20 kilovolt, what will be the threshold wavelength? So just we can put it in the formula. Lambda Th is 12,400 by 20,000 angstrom, that is 1.24 by 2 angstrom, or that is equal to 0.62 angstrom. That is the threshold wavelength. Now, the next question. In previous problem, if bombarded electron loses 60% of its kinetic energy in each collision, then find the wavelength of first two emitted photons. That is, bombarded electron loses 60% of its kinetic energy in each collision, then you need to find the wavelength of first two emitted photons. So before collision, initial kinetic energy Ki is equal to EVA, that is equal to 20,000 electron volt. In first collision, it loses 60% of its kinetic energy, so 40% remains. So after first collision, let me write the kinetic energy K1. It is 40% of Ki. 40% of Ki is 8,000 electron volt. This is left. So what is the wavelength of emitted photon? Lambda 1 is equal to Sc by Ki minus K1, that is 12,400 by 20,000 minus 8,000, that is equal to 12,400 by 12,000, or that is equal to 1.03 angstrom. That is the wavelength of first photon. Now we need to find second photon. After first collision, the kinetic energy left is how much? It is 8,000 electron volt. In second collision, it again loses 60% of its energy, so 40% is present. So after first collision, when we have second collision, the energy left is 40% of K1, 40% of K1, that is 3200 electron volt. So wavelengths of second photon lambda 2 hc by K1 minus K2, that is 12,400 by 8,000 minus 3,200. So 12,400 by 4,800 angstrom, or that is 124 by 48 angstrom, approximately get the actual value. It is of the order of 2.5 angstrom. So these are the wavelength of first and second emitted photon. In this way, continuously photons of different wavelengths are emitted. The minimum wavelength is threshold wavelength, and above it all possible wavelengths will be emitted. That you can see it is 1.03, 2.5. So all possible wavelengths, as long as for electron has energy, it keeps on emitting photons. So if I plot the graph of intensity or number of photons versus their wavelength, then the graph of intensity versus wavelength of emitted photon for continuous X-ray looks like this. It starts from lambda Th and goes up to infinity. There will be no photon having wavelength lesser than threshold wavelength. There will be no photon having wavelength greater than infinity. So the graph lies between lambda Th and infinity. And as I said earlier, any function which begins and ends at 0 must have at least one peak. So there is a peak in the graph. This is the intensity versus wavelength graph for continuous X-ray. Now the graph can be varied in different ways. The variation in I versus lambda graph, how it can be. Let us see. We have seen lambda Th is equal to Sc by EVA. So if we increase the accelerating voltage, lambda Th will decrease. So first case we get the variation in intensity versus wavelength graph, I versus lambda for two different accelerating voltage. Suppose this is the graph for V1 voltage, this is the graph for V2 voltage. The threshold wavelength corresponding to V1 is lambda 1, corresponding to V2 is lambda 2. So what we can conclude from here about V1 and V2? As you could see that lambda 1 is less than lambda 2, threshold wavelength of 1 is less than threshold wavelength of 2. This implies V1 greater than V2. Accelerating voltage in first case is greater than accelerating voltage in second case. What does it mean? That if we increase the accelerating voltage, the graph shifts towards origin. The threshold wavelength shifts towards lower value. So this is how intensity versus wavelength graph varies with accelerating voltage. Now how it varies with filament current? If we change filament current, then how it varies? If we increase filament current, look at the diagram of Coolidge tube. If we increase filament current, the filament will be heated more. So plate will be hotter. The hot plate will emit more electron. So if we increase the filament current, this will lead to increase in plate current. That is, more electrons will be emitted from plate. As more electrons will be emitted from plate, more electrons will be striking the target. As more electrons will be striking the target, more photons will be emitted. Number of emitted photons will be more. As more photons are emitted, intensity will be more. So if we change the filament current, the intensity will change and not the threshold wavelength. So if we change filament current, if I plot two graphs, this is lambda TH, this is lambda, this is intensity I, this is filament current I1, this is filament current I2. If I consider the peak at particular wavelength, here intensity is I1, here intensity is I2. So here from we can write as I1 is less than I2, filament current I1 is less than filament current I2. Higher the intensity, higher is the filament current, or higher the filament current, higher is the intensity. So this is how the graph of continuous X-ray varies with accelerating voltage and filament current. Okay. Now, next we need to know about the characteristic X-ray. How characteristic X-rays are produced? Sometime it happens that bombarded electron passes very close to the orbital electrons, and when it passes close to orbital electron, the bombarded electron goes out as well as the orbital electron. Suppose orbital electron comes out as well as the bombarded electron goes out. Both goes out, creating a vacancy in inner orbit. Whenever some vacancy is present in inner orbit, then electron from outer orbit will jump to fill the vacancy of inner orbit, emitting photon having energy gap equal to the orbital energy gap, and photon of same energy will be emitted. That's the idea of the element. So what happens? How characteristic X-rays are produced? This is the second case. When bombarded electron goes very close to orbital electron, the orbital electron comes out along with the bombarded electron, creating a vacancy in inner orbit. In this situation, electron from outer orbit jumps to inner orbit and emits photon of energy equal to energy gap. By energy of this photon, the energy gap can be identified, and by the energy gap we can identify the target element. And as the energy gap tells us about the target element, material of target element, that's why this X-ray is called characteristic X-ray. So, how different types of wavelengths are emitted? Let us name the orbits to be K, L, M, N, etc. When a vacancy is created in innermost orbit, that is in K shell, then an electron from L shell may jump to K shell. If not, then M to K. If not, then from N to K, and so on. When electron of L jumps to K to fill the vacancy, the emitted photon is called K alpha photon. If M jumps to K to fill the vacancy, it is called K beta photon. When electron from N jumps to K, emitting photon known as K gamma, and so on. In this way, K series X-ray is emitted. If a vacancy is created in L shell, electron from inner orbit will not go jump to outer orbit, rather electron from outer orbit will jump to inner orbit. So if a vacancy is created in L shell, electron from M, N, O, etc. can jump, emitting L alpha, L beta, etc. photon, M alpha, M beta, etc. photon. This is how the different transitions are named. So an external electron jumps from outer orbit to inner orbit. The emitted photon carries energy equal to energy gap, and this is why photons emitted in this way is called characteristic X-rays. In the next class, we will find how to find the wavelength corresponding to K alpha X-ray, then Moseley law, and this is how the elements of periodic table are properly arranged, because before that atomic number of all elements were not properly known by their chemical and physical properties. As you already know, the elements of lanthanide and octinide series show identical physical and chemical properties. They cannot be identified by their chemical or physical properties, but as their atomic numbers are different, the atomic energy gaps are different, the wavelength of emitted photon will be different, and from those photons we can identify the element. That we will be getting in the next class.